Welcome to Live with the Author. I'm Amanda Goodwin, and I'm an associate professor at Vanderbilt University, and I'm also the co-editor of Reading Research Quarterly. And we have today here with us one of our fantastic special issue authors. Welcome, Jim Hoffman.
Thank you. Thank you. And I wish my colleagues could be here with me, but they're occupied elsewhere. But Misty Sailors is also here with me at the University of North Texas, and Michiko Hikida is at Ohio State University.
Well, fantastic. And if you want to read more about this article, you can find it on our special issue page. And it's entitled Contesting Science That Silences, Amplifying Equity, Agency, and Design Research in Literacy Teacher Preparation. So even in reading the title, Jim, I'm curious, how did you get into this topic and the science of reading?
Well, that's a long and complicated. You introduced that.
Give us the short version.
Well, the short version is it's hard to ignore. I mean, the very short version is that, particularly for those of us in practice in teacher education, and particularly for those of us in Texas, you cannot ignore the science of reading because it's pushing at us from multiple directions. So I'm here talking about the science of reading because I feel I have to, and I have to do that. I don't want to say in defense of, because I don't want to be defensive, but in promoting research in literacy teacher preparation is what I think our focus needs to be. And I find all kinds of serious problems inside the science of reading as it's being applied to teacher preparation.
And so that kind of leads me to this question of the science of reading seems to be lots of different things to lots of different people. Right. What do you see the science of reading as?
So maybe I'll give a little bit of context that probably is not very important to most people, but I was a graduate student of Ron Carver, and Ron Carver was a wonderful human being. He passed away just, well, maybe 10 years after I graduated, but Ron was the epitome of simple view of reading, and I often wondered how we got along so well as his research assistant. And Ron is the person that formed SSSR. He was the initiator of it, founder of it, and it reflected his view of reading as his psychological perspective on reading and a simple view, although he didn't call it a simple view initially. So my introduction came very, very early in my academic career through Ron Carver. It's come to me today more through, as I said, through the pressures that are coming through teacher preparation. And what I believe about the science of reading is, and I'm going to jump a little bit ahead to what we talk about Herb Simon's work. I believe that the science of reading is a community of practice that's focused on understanding reading processes, particularly reading processes with very young children. And its efforts are focused on discovering how reading works and how reading is acquired within those group of children with a very inside the head autonomous view of reading, that we call it, very inside the view of head of reading processes, and also tending to focus on word recognition primarily, and less on other areas that could be of interest and could be of focus. Does that,
okay, yeah, that's absolutely. So you're taking it in terms of what you've heard about it. I think as I've been listening to people's definitions, I've heard that focus on that early side, but also, and the focus on phonics and word reading, but also that the field seems to be pushing back to a broader view of the science of reading. Would you take that broader position?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that kind of leads me, I think that's a perfect setup for what does your article contribute to our understanding of the science of reading?
Well, I hope oh gosh, there's lots of ways of thinking about that. I'll focus back on Herb Simon's work, which we addressed in the latter part of that article. I mean, it's first of all, it's not a data-driven article; it's an argument-driven article. But Simon, I don't want to say Paul Simon. Herb Simon made a distinction long ago, between what he called the sciences of the artificial and traditional kinds of sciences that we find in academia and higher education. And what he says is that traditional science in higher education and research in that arena is focusing on explaining how things are. The artificial sciences, he compares, are sciences that are about how things could be. And within that group, so he basically redivides universities into the sciences of the artificial and the sciences and the traditional academic sciences. And I think what we need to do is push for literacy research, particularly literacy teacher preparation research, but also teaching research and literacy toward this science of the artificial framework, which is about what some people call the improvement sciences, what some people call design development work, where we're actually deeply build our field and build the knowledge base for our field around practice and around improving practice, not comparing practices. I haven't read everything in the article so far, in the journals, in the issues so far, but I did read Tim Shanahan's piece, and he reminded me as he was talking about reading recovery and looking at all the different studies that have shown reading recovery to be effective or not effective, et cetera, that's the kind of research that's just not been productive for our field. And we've learned that every generation seems to have to learn that again. We learned it in the first grade studies. We learned it throughout our history that these kinds of comparison studies don't really tell us much about what could be. We would be much better off if we took reading recovery, for example, and just said, it's pretty good. It seems to work for a lot of kids. How can we make it better? And focus our inquiries on making things better and improving practice, rather than comparing A to B to C to D and so on. So I think that's the message that we would like to bring about the science of reading, that the science of reading needs to be inclusive of these artificial sciences, and obviously artificial doesn't mean fake. He includes in their engineering, I mean, all kinds of domains where the basic work of the field is to improve from where we are. So what I would like to do and argue for is the expansion of the view of the science of reading to be inclusive of improvement sciences.
And one of the things you argue in your paper is that if we take that perspective, or if we're thinking about the science of reading as this broader construct of different methodologies, that we know a lot more, in particular about teacher preparation.
Yes. And yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, that's the way we grow our practices. It's what I have done for 45 years, is constantly try to improve the practices that we're using through. I have not always called it design development research, but that's what we've done. We're constantly tinkering with, working with, adding to, modifying, adapting our practices, and looking at the ways in which those influence the teachers that we prepare and the students that they eventually work with. Yeah.
So taking your critical perspective, what should teachers do tomorrow in their classrooms based off of your article?
Improve their teaching.
And how do they do that? So, I do think that I do think that you're advocating for tinkering, but I assume that you're advocating for knowledge-based tinkering, like tinkering for a reason, but then also studying that tinkering. Does that tinkering work? Is it better? Is it not better? For whom? Under what contexts?
Well, I wouldn't put that on teachers. I don't think teachers need to worry about what context this works under or what it doesn't work under. What they need to understand, what they need to work on is, and let's just take comprehension processes and engagement with text and comprehension. What can I do? What am I doing in my classroom, and how can I make my instruction more powerful around comprehension, if that's the focus that they choose to focus on? They don't need to worry about whether that's going to work with all kids. They don't need to worry about what context that works in. What they need to focus on is almost the old action research principle of you live inside and work inside a context, improve inside that context, and describe principles of improvement that you've established around a practice. And as long as other people are doing that and connecting with each other inside the scientific circles, we'll grow a broader understanding of our practices.
Hearing you talk from a perspective of a teacher, like, it makes me wonder, like, how do I improve? So if I'm a teacher out there that wants to improve, how do I go about doing it?
take up, first of all, well, first, I don't think there's a first. Take up the identity of a researcher. That's your job. Your job is as a teacher, your job is as a researcher. You're a researcher that works in a particular kind of space for understanding. I don't use the term teacher research. Your practice-based research, and there's a set of tools and methodologies that will enable you to grow your practices systematically with evidence and argument toward improved outcomes. So,
Very cool. I mean, I hear quite a few things in there, which is fascinating. I mean, one is to take up the perspective of a researcher. The other is to, use tools, use methodologies. Another is use data, collect
right.
data, analyze data. And all of those seem like such powerful tools for teachers to use to improve their practice. What is your
book? We do have a book. so we do have a book on practice-based research. It's by Hoffman and Sailors, in which we have been working particularly with our undergraduates to encourage them to take up this identity even in their pre-service program. From the very beginning of the program, we work with them as researchers of their practice. And researchers that can communicate and offer to the field more broadly professional knowledge through their work. So I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah, and so what does your study mean for principals and policymakers?
I don't know. Those are such hard questions, but so in 1981, that seems like forever ago. That is a long time ago. It's almost 40 years ago. We published a piece in the Reading Teacher called High Stakes Testing in Texas. Today, high stakes testing in Texas today, tomorrow, ? And that was all about, that was early on as people were beginning to sort of see the sort of potential perils of high stakes testing. And I look back at that piece, it's been cited, I don't know, close to 400 times. And all of that work was raising cautions around the use of high stakes testing and the effects that it can have on all kinds of areas that we all know about. I feel the same way about what's going on in Texas in teacher preparation, that it's happening so intensely in Texas today that tomorrow it's going to be across the country. And maybe it already is, but I'm certainly more aware of it here. And it's being fueled by policymaker decisions with collaboration of educational leadership within the state, so that we end up with, as we talk about in the article, we end up this mandated curriculum of science of reading, that all teachers are going to go through this training program in the state of Texas for the science of reading. We end up with mandates for, we've changed the certification in Texas to read the new certification, which is you're certified you're certified as an elementary teacher, EC6 elementary teacher and of the science of reading. It's actually now in the name of the degree that you have. And all of those actions are politically motivated, possibly almost certainly monetarily motivated, and none of them are based on any research that I know of. I can't find any research that would justify that level of intervention and imposition on teacher preparation programs and on teachers in the state without any evidence. I hate to think of COVID, but we would never accept, a vaccine that had not been tested or at least looked at. And the science of reading doesn't do research in teacher preparation. They're the only research I can find on.
And that was an important point of your article, is that the science of reading needs to do more research on the science of teacher prepreparation, or to do more.
I'm a little nervous about that, but if they do, they need to provide the evidence that these kinds of interventions on the scale that they're happening have any positive effect on teachers or kids. And
well, I thought in your article, it was really interesting too. You gave the example of how, like, it's not necessarily that the content is problematic, it's the way in which the content is being taught and the lack of critical lenses. So I think you gave the example of, this idea of equity and this idea of agency, and how these are partners
Right.
to some of the concepts in the science of reading.
Yes, at least partners, almost maybe argue that they're not separable from the kinds of processes that are being investigated. So
So it
certainly,
almost feels like a bigger argument of to say, like, for principals and policymakers to really think about what is the goal here, what's the knowledge, what's the research say, and your big point is, what does the research on teacher preparation say?
correct.
I like it.
And it says, and it's smoke and mirrors. There's nothing there, despite what we read in hard words, despite what we read in those reports. There's just no basis for claiming that an intervention offered at the state level to the degree of the science of reading, quote, intervention, is going to have any kind of positive effect. And what's happening is, and the reason I go back to the high stakes testing is, it's happening at universities, it's happening in colleges, because now you have NCTQ partnership with US News and World Report on the ratings of universities. And so you find universities now having to shape their curriculum based on the stakes associated with the ratings of universities on all those different kinds of rating systems. But it's become high stakes for universities to get the best score that they can get economically, important for institutions. And there's not really any questioning about whether it's good practice or not. It's a question of, you need to do this and you need to prepare them for this test that's all students have to take. I mean, all students graduating from preparation programs in the state of Texas have to take a special test now called the Science of Reading, of which, again, I cannot find any evidence of reliability, validity data on that particular assessments or any assessments that have been administered.
It seems like a big message there is to question things, to really, look at what the research says. And you had a piece, part of your piece was that we do know a lot about teacher preparation. What do we know? Like, what should principals and policymakers be making sure to partner some of these, initiatives with?
That's a huge question. I can tell you, excuse me. So we have a database that called CITE, which contains, as best we can, all of the research that's been done and published in referee journals on literacy teacher preparation. We've got about 800 articles in that database. And we're making it an ongoing public database that anybody can access. Anybody can go into and begin to sort through and ask the kinds of questions of, what do we know about such and such? And use the research that's available that's been actually done on a particular topic. We're currently looking at field-based teacher preparation. So we're doing a review right now, looking at what do we know as a field, as a community, about the field-based experiences that are part of teacher preparation programs, literacy teacher preparation programs. So I can't remember the number. I think it's about 150 studies that we're looking at that have examined field-based experiences. And we're looking at sub areas of those, of that body of research. So for example, we're looking at relationships and studies that have focused on the building of relationships, both between pre-service teachers and supervisors and field supervisors and university supervisors, university faculty, the students they work with. We're looking at what do we know about the importance of relationships in teacher learning, pre-service teacher learning particularly, and what are the program features, what are the principles associated with field experiences that nurture the relationship side of learning to teach. So that's digging down.
But I think the point there is that we have so much data, as you're saying, we have so many studies out there on teacher preparation, but what you're looking at is not just the sciencey of reading-y type things, but you're also adding in these bigger ideas of relationships, of context, and that kind of stuff.
And we are looking, I mean, we can look at the database for research that's looked at preparation of teachers in using using these understandings of reading processes. in how they take up those understandings and use them inside their practice. And it's actually a very small part of that research base. Most of that research base that's focused on literacy processes has really focused on those studies that have identified what teachers don't know about the structure of English, what they don't know about. So that turns into, from a deficit perspective, turns into a curriculum for we've got to fill in all those things that they don't know about the structure of English, but we still don't know if that structure of English knowledge, the ways in which that actually aids the quality of the teaching that teachers are doing.
Absolutely. So that kind of leads me to takeaway messages. What are some things that you want people to go away from this article thinking about?
I want people going away from it screaming. I want people, hopefully at this early stage, to be just saying we've taken a turn down a path that's going to lead us into bad things for teacher preparation, and hopefully come back and re-examine these pathways, and hopefully by collaborating with policymakers, we can find a shift in that path that'll take us to value what we know about quality teacher preparation, and what often this science of reading pathway leads us to is controlling teachers and scripting teachers' teaching, which diminishes the amount of adaptivity that they can have in their practice, and where they can use their knowledge to be responsive to kids. So our message, I guess, is a scream about we've got to stop doing this based on lack of evidence being provided. The second part of that scream is toward our field, and I don't know that it's going to go very far, but I am really hoping that at some point we can examine the relationship of teacher preparation, literacy teaching with psychology, that I think is the wrong field. I mean, I think we have a lot to learn from what psychologists study, but that's not the field that's going to lead to improved practice. At least the tools that are currently being used and how they're being used are not the engine for growing our practices. We have to move toward improvement sciences. And it's happening. I'm not asking for something that isn't happening. It's happening in Europe, particularly, where design research and improvement sciences, where colleges of education are finding themselves inside of umbrellas which are called improvement sciences. So we just have not had yet those conversations within our academic community.
Yeah, and it strikes me that one thing you're advocating for is for a broader science of reading. I mean, it feels like after having done a lot of these interviews and reading a lot of these articles, a lot of what you're advocating for is what researchers feel like the science of reading should be. So for example, you know, somebody has an article out there where they're talking about the science of reading and the importance of adaptive teacher expertise.
Sure.
So the importance of teachers being able to adapt what they're doing to the students in their classroom. There's two articles in our special issue about the importance of translating these findings into actual practice, which sounds a lot like what's happening kind of in the Texas context, right? They're taking some specific findings and putting them at this very large scale that doesn't feel super accurate.
Right.
And so it seems like it may not be as much the problem with the science of reading as researchers and as our community is conceptualizing it, but more as what is being advocated for in particular contexts in these narrow views. And so that was something that this special issue was set up to explore. To be honest, just like you said, I came into this because I kept hearing about it. And I was wondering why I was hearing so much about it. And so I wanted to explore what it was. And I kept hearing about all the narrow views that you've been talking about today. And what I've taken away from this experience is the much more broader view. And this idea that the science, if we define it, if we explore it, if we use all the tools in our wheelhouse, that we may be able to make this change if we can get this bigger idea of the science of reading.
Yeah, I've had recent conversations with Rob Tierney in which he wants to talk about it as the sciences of reading. So pluralizing it helps a little bit. Broadening it, I guess you could think about it as broadening, but I do believe that it's legitimate to think about science the science of reading that focuses on the reading processes and understanding those processes. But there are other sciences that are interested in teaching and the improvement of teaching and so on. So I think they can coexist as sciences, but not necessarily be identified as a single science that defines who we are and what we do.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you said that. I haven't heard that sciences of reading in all these conversations and all these articles, but I have heard it advocated that we need to have a science of writing instruction to be complementary to the science of reading. I have heard that we need to have a science of reading instruction. I'm hearing from you that we need to have a science of reading teacher preparation. That there's all these different ones. And so it's an interesting framework to work from. So
even in the first part of our article, we trouble the notion that for us, writing that article and not using the term literacy, but using the term reading is really difficult. And I don't know, as a field, and I'll speak broadly as a field, we've embraced literacy as who we are and what we study. And the fact that there is a group of people who want to talk about the science of reading separate from other sciences, and reading isolated from other language systems seems arcane. I mean, it just seems like we left that 60 years ago. Not 60, that's too hard. maybe 25 years ago.
But maybe it's also in who's taking this up. And I think that one thing that's been wonderful about this experience is having conversations. And so when I think about how we move forward as a field, we have these conversations. We talk about what do we need? How many sciences do we need? How do we go about this, and how do we unite as a field? Because at the end of the day, it feels like we're all in this to improve the literacy outcomes of kids and of teachers who are teaching those kids, and of building understandings, multimodal understandings, understandings of different kids and communities and different literacies. And so, I think your article, for me in particular, really pushed me to add a criticality to this and to think broadly about, we already do know a lot. So how can we capitalize on what we know?
If I had worked on a different title, it would be the unintended consequences of the science of reading, because that's a way that people have framed high stakes testing, is that there's a lot of unintended consequences that come with high stakes testing that are not, at least in terms of the claims for it, are not what they're trying to do. But it does, high stakes testing has consequences. A science of reading exam, a science of reading, those have consequences. And I think we need to be aware of what those are. And I'm absolutely okay with people who want to study and understand how kids learn to decode. I think that's wonderful stuff. I think we need more of that kind of work. I just want to be sure that we take that as a knowing of, not as a model for how we improve. And that's again, I'm repeating myself, but that's where I keep coming back to as a focus, that we are we, the people who are interested in the outcomes you talked about, and as teacher educators, and as that's what we are interested in. We're interested in improved outcomes. And if the understanding of the reading process coming out of the science of reading as it stands helps us be smarter in our work with teacher preparation, that's great. Let's use it. But it might not be, right? It might not be particularly informative.
Although I do think that understandings of improvement or lack of improvement are also really helpful. You talked a little bit in the beginning about comparisons. And personally, for me, the strength of the comparison is in understanding not just like what's more effective or less effective, but why, what's going on, because it's almost helps me understand the improvements that are
absolutely going on. And improvement sciences, that's within the framework of doing improvement science work. That notion of why is foregrounded. Where it's not, where improvement sciences are less focused is on generalizability. So, a person who's engaged in improvement science work in a particular context is not particularly concerned at that point in time about how the findings in a particular set of development work can be generalized across context. Eventually, that is probably the work of someone to connect those pieces together, but that's not what drives improvement science work.
Well, but in your piece there is just this such an important part of like, we are all in partnership and we need to be in partnerships because we all seem to have a different piece of the puzzle that we're building out, because, you know, certain folks are doing that work. Certain folks are doing the work of trying to figure out how it generalizes. Certain folks are doing the work of trying to figure out how you can teach it. Certain folks are doing the work of how to put it at scale. And there just seems like there's a lot of opportunity for partnerships as we're thinking about this. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for being here with us. I know I'm going away from this with a lot to think about, and I just really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And thank you all of you for putting together the issues. And I think it's timely for the field. There's a lot to read there and a lot to sort of consume. But in the end, I think it's really going to be important for our field.
Very cool. Well, thanks so much. Appreciate it.